You think someone with a face like that should be serving customers? The man sneered. But he had no idea who she really was. For years, Emma Brooks, a quiet, scarred waitress at a roadside diner near Camp Brantley, served coffee before dawn without complaint. Her face bore the unmistakable traces of fire and battle, but her hands were steady, her service flawless, and her heart silent. She never corrected the whispers, those who assumed drugs or disaster had ruined her. Only a few knew the truth. Emma had once been a Marine field medic with Bravo Unit 17, who, during a mortar attack in Iraq, ran straight into flames to save 2 wounded Marines. She bore the scars not of failure, but of unmatched courage. That Tuesday, 3 men in suits mocked her face. She said little, only, "I've served people like you before, in harsher places." No one defended her. But the next morning, something incredible happened. Before sunrise, dozens of Marines, some in civilian clothes, some with canes, prosthetics, or medals, formed a line outside the diner. Each brought a small token, a patch, a coin, a folded note. One whispered, "You carried me out of hell." Emma didn't need headlines or apologies. That line of silent gratitude told the only story that ever mattered. She wasn't a waitress with scars. She was a soldier with history. She served coffee in silence. They mocked her scars. The next morning, the Marines came. Every morning at exactly 5 a.m., Emma Brooks, 32, tied her apron and stepped behind the counter at Brantley Diner, a no-frills roadside eatery near an old Marine base in North Carolina. She moved with quiet grace, pouring coffee, remembering orders, always on time. But no one who came through that door could ignore one thing: the jagged scars running from her right temple, curling down her neck, and winding along her arm. Most customers didn't ask. They whispered instead. Car accident? House fire? Maybe a drug thing. Emma never responded. She just smiled, refilled their coffee, and went back to work. But one Tuesday morning, 3 sharply dressed men sat in a corner booth, clearly on their way to a business meeting. When Emma approached, the largest of the 3 sneered. "You think someone with a face like that should be serving customers?" he said loudly, looking her up and down. "Wouldn't dishwashing in the back be more appropriate?" The diner went silent. The elderly man at the counter turned away. The cook froze mid-flip. But Emma didn't flinch. "I've served people like you before," she said softly, her voice firm. "Only under fire." They laughed in disbelief. "Military? With that face? You wouldn't make it past basic," one scoffed. Emma returned to work. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed calm. When the owner, Eleanor, asked if she was okay, Emma simply said, "I've dealt with worse, since Fallujah." What the men didn't know, what almost no one did, was that Emma had once been a field medic with Bravo Unit 17 in Iraq. In 2010, during a surprise mortar attack on their forward base, 2 Marines were trapped in a burning transport vehicle. Emma ran toward the fire. She pulled one man out, then another. As she turned back, a second explosion slammed her into concrete barriers. She'd survived. But the scars never left her. After her medical discharge, civilian life hadn't been easy. Interviews always started with smiles, then changed the moment she walked in. The polite rejections followed. Until Eleanor hired her, without a question about the scars. "Can you start tomorrow?" That was all she asked. The day after the incident with the businessman, Emma arrived at the diner early as usual. But something was different. A line had formed outside before sunrise. Dozens of men and women stood in quiet formation along the sidewalk, each holding something small wrapped in cloth. They weren't in uniform, but their posture, straight backs, steady eyes, gave them away. They were Marines. At 6 a.m. sharp, the first man entered, graying hair, sun-worn face. "Black coffee," he said, sliding onto a stool. "You don't remember me, do you, Brooks?" She studied him. "Lieutenant Harlow," he said with a smile. "Captain now, retiring soon?" Emma blinked. She remembered pulling him from the transport, the burns, the smoke, the screams. He placed a small green cloth on the counter and unwrapped it slowly. A battered metal insignia. Bravo 17's medallion. "Every man who came home from that fire wants to return something to you," he said. "We've been looking for you. One of the guys saw you last week. Said you looked just like the medic in the captain's photo." Outside, the line remained. One by one, they entered. Some offered coins, other patches, notes, tears. A man with a prosthetic leg said, "I remember you. You laughed at my jokes while my leg was hanging off. I knew if my medic could smile, I was gonna live." Local news caught wind. The story went viral. A waitress with scars mocked. Then the Marines showed up. Hundreds of thousands watched. Veterans commented, "She saved my brother." Fallujah angel. Emma never asked for attention. She accepted each gift with quiet dignity. When the man who mocked her saw the footage on his hotel TV, he called the diner, asking to apologize. "You couldn't have known," she said, "but what matters is what we learn afterward." Later that week, a formal ceremony was held at the VFW Hall. Emma arrived in a simple black dress, her hair down for the first time in years. She didn't hide her scars. When her name was called, 200 people rose in silence. They presented her with the Purple Heart she had once locked away, a medal she never thought she deserved. "That's why you deserve it," the sergeant major said. "Because you never thought you did." A young Marine approached her after the event, his infant son in one arm. "His middle name is Brooks," he said. "So he grows up knowing what courage looks like." Emma choked up. She didn't see herself as a hero. But now, everywhere she turned, she saw the ripple of her past, lives she'd touched and saved. Back at the diner, a small wooden plaque now hangs behind the counter. It reads, "I never asked for recognition. I only hoped the ones I pulled out would live long enough to live kindly toward others." Emma still pours the first cup of coffee at 6 a.m. sharp. But now people call her something new. The diner's Marine. They mocked her scars. The next morning, a line of Marines stretched down the block. At 5 a.m. sharp, Charlotte Adams began her shift at the roadside diner just outside an old Marine base in North Carolina. She tied her faded apron with practiced ease, the motions of muscle memory. Every day, she served coffee, eggs, and quiet comfort to truckers, factory workers, and retirees. Most knew her as reliable and polite. Few looked her in the eye. That's because of the scars. Jagged reminders of something deeper, the network of tissue began at her right temple, disappeared under her collar, and reappeared along her right arm. Most customers pretended not to notice. Some whispered behind menus. "Fire, maybe? Car crash? Drug rehab?" Charlotte never answered. She didn't owe anyone her story. She poured coffee and kept moving. But one Tuesday morning, 3 corporate types in white shirts and loosened ties came in. They took the corner booth and started barking about deadlines and stock portfolios. When Charlotte approached with menus, the largest of the men sneered. "You really think someone with a face like that should be in front of customers? Ever heard of a kitchen?" The diner fell into stunned silence. Charlotte didn't flinch. "I've served men like you before," she said calmly, pouring coffee. "But usually under fire." The man scoffed. "Military? With that face? You'd never make it past the parking lot." They laughed. No one else did. The cook froze. spatula in midair. An older vet at the counter quietly slid a $20 tip beside his $5 breakfast and walked out. Charlotte's hands shook, but not her gaze. The owner, Elaine, asked if she was okay. Charlotte nodded. "Been through worse," she said softly. Fallujah. Years ago, Charlotte had been a field medic and logistics specialist with Bravo Unit 17. In 2010, their forward base was hit by a mortar strike. When a supply truck caught fire with 2 young Marines trapped inside, Charlotte ran toward the blast. She dragged both men out. As she turned back, a secondary explosion threw her against a concrete barrier. Her right side caught the worst of it. The recovery was brutal. The discharge was quiet. And civilian life? It was lonelier than combat. Employers looked away. Interviews ended with, "We'll be in touch." She tucked her Purple Heart into a box under her bed and stopped correcting people when they guessed wrong about her scars. Elaine never asked. She just hired her. That Wednesday morning, after the insult, after the laughter, Charlotte arrived at 5:15 a.m. to prep the diner. She noticed something unusual. Across the street, dozens of people had begun lining up in the dark. Men and women, most in jeans and flannel, but with unmistakable posture. Back straight, hands still, alert. Marines, each carried something small, wrapped in cloth. At 6 a.m., when Charlotte flipped the open sign, the first man entered. Salt and pepper hair, sand-worn skin. "Coffee, black," he said, taking a stool. "You don't remember me, do you?" She studied him. "Lieutenant Harmon?" she asked. "Captain now," he said, smiling, "but not for much longer." He placed a green cloth on the counter and unwrapped it. A worn Bravo 17 insignia. "That fire in Fallujah, you dragged me out. And 12 others," he said. "We've been trying to find you. One of my privates saw you here last week. He recognized your face from the photo I keep in my wallet." Charlotte blinked hard. "I was just doing my job." "No," he said gently. "You went far beyond it." Outside, the line moved forward. One by one, Marines stepped into the diner. Some brought patches. Others handed her notes. A few just nodded and placed small tokens in her palm. Coins, pins, even parts of old dog tags. By noon, the diner was packed. Local news picked up the story. Someone posted a video. A veteran waitress mocked. Next morning, this happened. The post exploded online. Veterans across the country recognized her name. One wrote, "Charlotte Adams treated me in Iraq when I thought I wouldn't make it. She didn't just save lives, she gave us courage." The next day, Charlotte arrived at her usual time to find a steaming cup of coffee already waiting at her station. No note, no explanation, but it was just the way she liked it. That small act would repeat every morning from then on. When the businessmen who mocked her saw the viral coverage, they returned to apologize. "We didn't know," one said awkwardly. "You didn't need to," Charlotte replied. "It's not about knowing someone's past, it's about not judging their present." A week later, a ceremony was held by her old unit. She wore a simple black dress, her hair loose for once. She didn't hide her scars. 200 Marines and veterans stood when she entered the VFW hall. They presented her the Purple Heart she never claimed. A young father introduced his baby son. His middle name is Adams, so he grows up knowing what courage looks like. Charlotte wept. Today, a small plaque hangs in the diner. Our scars may look different, but we all carry them, seen or unseen. Veterans come from hours away just to shake her hand. Young recruits seek her quiet advice. She tells them, "Fear is normal. Courage is what you do next." Charlotte never asked for recognition. She only hoped the ones she saved would live long enough to be kind to others. And now they do. They whispered about her scars. but the Marines remembered her sacrifice. Every morning before the sun rose, Grace Mitchell, a 33-year-old waitress, tied on her apron and opened the doors to the old diner just off Highway 17 in North Carolina. The place wasn't much. Peeling vinyl booths, a scratched-up counter, and a menu that hadn't changed in 2 decades. But the coffee was hot, the eggs were cheap, and Grace? She was always there. Regulars knew her by her quiet work ethic. Never late, never flustered. But most noticed something else first. The scars. They ran from her right temple, down her neck, and snaked along her arm before vanishing beneath her sleeve. Some customers whispered, "Car crash? Maybe a fire." One murmured, "Probably drugs. Those people do reckless things." They didn't ask. Grace never offered. She just poured coffee and took orders, her dignity wrapped in silence. Then came Tuesday. 3 men in suits, corporate types with polished shoes and voices made for boardrooms, sat in a booth by the window. Grace approached with menus. One of them looked her over with a mixture of revulsion and arrogance. "You really think someone with a face like that should be serving food?" he said, loud enough for the diner to fall silent. "Dishwashing might be more your speed." Grace stood still. The silence was heavy. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I've served men like you before, but in places a lot more dangerous than this." The man sneered. "Oh, really? Military? That face wouldn't pass basic training?" They laughed, but nobody else did. An older man at the counter, wearing a faded Vietnam vet cap, left a $20 tip on a $5 meal and nodded silently before walking out. The cook stopped flipping pancakes. A trucker got up and left without finishing his plate. Grace's hands trembled, but she kept working. What no one in that booth knew was that Grace had served as a combat medic in Iraq. Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion. She'd earned her scars pulling 2 Marines from a burning vehicle during a mortar attack. The second explosion had thrown her against a concrete barrier. She woke up in a field hospital, half her body burned. The doctors saved her life. The uniform was retired. The medals were boxed and stored away in a drawer under her bed. Grace never talked about it. The next morning, something happened. She arrived at 5:15 a.m. to prep the diner like always. But across the street, in the early morning fog, there was a line. Men and women standing in silence, some in plain clothes, others with unmistakable military posture. As the sun rose, more arrived. One carried a folded cloth, another had a coin in his hand. At exactly 6 a.m., when Grace flipped the open sign, the first Marine stepped in. "Coffee black," he said, sitting at the counter. "You don't remember me, do you?" She looked closer. Recognition hit. "Corporal Hayes?" she asked, surprised. "Captain now," he smiled. "Retiring next month." He unwrapped the cloth, a scorched Bravo Company medallion. "You saved me in Fallujah, and not just me. 12 of us walked out because you pulled us through fire. We've been looking for you ever since. Someone saw your face online yesterday and recognized you." One by one, Marines came in. Each left a token, a patch, a coin, a letter. Some didn't speak. They just nodded, eyes full of meaning. By noon, the story had gone viral. Veteran waitress mocked. Marines respond. Photos of the line outside the diner spread online. One post read, "She treated me in Iraq. My brother made it home because of her. That woman is a hero." Later that week, Grace was invited to a small ceremony at the local VFW hall. It was the first time she wore a dress in years. For the first time, she didn't hide the scars. 200 people stood when she walked in. A young Marine approached her, holding a baby. "This is Matthew. His middle name is Mitchell, so he always knows his name carries courage." A retired colonel stepped forward and handed Grace her Purple Heart, recovered from military records. "You never claimed this," he said gently. "We thought it was time it came home." Tears fell as Grace looked at the medal. "I never felt like I deserved it," she said quietly. "Others gave more." "That's exactly why you do," the colonel replied. Back at the diner, Elaine, the owner, framed a photograph from 2010. In it, Grace, burned and bloodied, carried a Marine out of the smoke. The caption read, "I didn't ask for recognition. I just hoped they lived long enough to live kindly toward others." And they did. Now, every Tuesday at 7 a.m., the corner booth is filled with young Marines in training. Grace pours them coffee and teaches them how to tie a tourniquet, how to stay calm in chaos, how to lead with courage. When asked how she overcame the fear, Grace replies, "I was never fearless. I just moved forward anyway." They laughed at her scars until the Marines returned to say thank you. At 5 a.m. sharp, Carolyn Hayes unlocked the doors of Sunrise Diner, a modest eatery nestled off an old highway near Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Her apron was already tied, her hair pulled back tight. She moved with quiet purpose, refilling ketchup bottles, wiping down booths, brewing the first pot of coffee. For the early crowd, truckers, retirees, and overnight workers, she was a fixture, predictable, dependable. But it wasn't just her steady hands or strong coffee that stood out. It was the scars. They traced from her right temple, down her neck, and along her arm, visible no matter how long her sleeves. Most customers noticed but said nothing. Some looked away. Others whispered guesses behind menus. A car crash? A fire? Drugs? Carolyn never answered. She just smiled softly and kept working. That Tuesday morning began like any other, until it didn't. 3 well-dressed men in suits walked in, passing through town, loud, confident. They took a booth in the back, laughing over golf scores and business deals. Carolyn approached with menus. One of them looked up, stared a little too long, then said, loud enough for half the diner to hear, "You really think someone with a face like that should be serving food?" Silence fell. The cook stopped mid-flip. An elderly man at the counter set down his spoon. Carolyn didn't flinch. She laid down the menus and said calmly, "I've served people like you before, but in much harsher places." The man smirked. "Don't tell me, military? With that face, you wouldn't pass the front gate." They laughed. No one else did. Carolyn's hands trembled, but she kept pouring coffee. Her eyes met the gaze of every patron she served. That evening, in her small apartment, she sat in silence, running her fingers over an old photograph tucked in a drawer. A younger version of herself, bandaging a Marine's leg, her face bloodied but focused. She hadn't always been a waitress. 15 years earlier, Carolyn had served as a combat medic with the U.S. Marines, Bravo Unit, Iraq. During her second deployment, a mortar strike hit their forward base. 2 Marines were trapped inside a burning vehicle. She ran toward the fire, pulled both men out. The second explosion threw her into a wall of concrete and flame. She spent months in hospitals, discharged, decorated, forgotten. Civilian life wasn't easy. Employers smiled until they saw the scars. "Not a good fit for front of house? We'll call you." They never did. Sunrise Diner was the first place that said, "Can you start tomorrow?" A week before the incident, a group of young Marines had come in for breakfast. They wore civilian clothes but sat like soldiers. Carolyn served them quietly. One of them stayed behind, slipping a folded napkin beneath his cup. Later, cleaning the table, she opened it. "Thank you for saving our captain. I recognized you from his picture." PFC Reynolds, Bravo Unit. She tucked it in her apron pocket, where it stayed. The next morning, Carolyn arrived early. But something was off. Across the street, in the pale light of dawn, stood a line, dozens of people waiting in silence. Most wore civilian clothes, but their bearing was unmistakable. Marines. Each carried something small, wrapped in cloth or sealed in an envelope. At 6 a.m., the doors opened. The first man stepped in, silver-haired and sun-weathered. "Coffee, black," he said, then softer. "You don't remember me, do you?" Carolyn studied his face. "Captain Sanders?" "Retired now," he smiled. He placed a package on the counter. Inside was a scorched Bravo medallion. "You pulled me from the fire. 12 of us made it home because you didn't run." All morning, Marines continued to arrive. One gave her a coin. Another, a unit patch. Some simply shook her hand. Word had spread. A vet disrespected, and the men whose lives she'd saved had returned. By noon, a trucker's video of the morning's procession had gone viral. This is how heroes are remembered. The line stretched around the block. Local news showed up. So did more veterans, and quietly, so did the man who had mocked her. He called the diner to apologize. Carolyn took the call. "You didn't know," she said. "But now you do." That weekend, a ceremony was held at the local VFW. Carolyn attended in a simple black dress. For the first time in years, she didn't hide her scars. The room of 200 veterans rose in silence as she entered. Captain Sanders presented her a commendation long overdue. A colonel handed her back the Purple Heart she'd never claimed. Another vet gave her his own insignia, whispering, "My daughter's in medicine because of you." A Marine walked up with his wife and baby. "This is Jacob. His middle name is Hayes." Carolyn wept. Today, a plaque hangs on the wall of Sunrise Diner beneath an old combat photo of her in uniform. It reads, "I never sought recognition. I only hoped the ones I helped would live long enough to live kindly." Every Tuesday morning, young recruits now fill the back booth. Carolyn teaches them how to tie a tourniquet with a napkin, how to keep calm when everything goes wrong, how to lead with compassion. When asked how she did it all, she says, "I wasn't fearless. I just didn't run." At 5 a.m., like she had for years, Carolyn Hayes tied her apron, brewed the coffee, and prepared for another quiet shift at Sunrise Diner. The scars on her face and arm had become as much a part of her uniform as the name tag she wore. Most customers looked past her, offering polite smiles or avoiding her gaze altogether. She never minded. Not much. But when a group of sharply dressed men came in one Tuesday morning and one of them sneered, "Shouldn't you be in the back with a face like that?" Something changed. Carolyn didn't argue. She simply poured his coffee and answered, "I've served men like you before, but in combat zones, not diners." What no one expected was what happened the next morning. At dawn, a line stretched around the diner. Marines, young and old, each one carrying something small, a coin, a patch, a note. They'd come not to eat, but to thank the woman who had once dragged them from fire, bandaged their wounds, and whispered hope into ears fading under enemy fire. The woman with scars was no longer invisible. She was seen, honored, and remembered. Sometimes the people who look the most broken are the ones who once held others together. True strength doesn't always wear a uniform. It often wears an apron, smiles through pain, and never asks for recognition. Carolyn's scars weren't signs of weakness. They were proof of service, of sacrifice, of survival. If someone in your life once carried you through the fire, physically or emotionally, share their name in the comments. Let their legacy be remembered. And if you believe that scars are stories of courage, not shame, hit subscribe to help us keep honoring the quiet heroes the world forgets.